Okay, so here's a game between myself and Razel, frequent ODM training partner, where I'm playing as the Dark Elves and he is playing as the Beastmen. So, for my build, it's going to be Ice Power's standard Dark Elf, Marathi Manticore style. She comes in with Soul Stealer and her items to make the Soul Stealer cheaper. Meanwhile, on the Beastmen side, we do see a Brave Shaman of Wild with the Traitor Kin picked to try and counter this type of blob cell. Now immediately I do throw down a Soul Stealer on the Brave Shaman, and this is actually a technique stolen from Ice Power where you just throw down early Soul Stealers because you have so many that you can actually use. I actually do play quite aggressively with my chariots too, and the reason for doing this is to actually bait out blob fights and larger engagements so that I can throw down yet more Soul Stealers with the Slaanesha's Harvesters, and boy oh boy does it do a lot of damage. With the Manticore support, Centaurs will generally rout off immediately after, and already we're seeing a huge rout on the Beastmen infantry and cavalry side, all with a little bit of baiting from the chariots. In this case, the chariots only taking a little bit of damage, but I do keep all my models. Now I do go for another engagement, now diving in on this feral Manticore, actually just gooning it out quite hard, and knowing that I'm not really too worried about getting surrounded here, because that's right, Soul Stealer has a very short cooldown, and I do throw down yet another onto this entire blob of units, which just destroys all of the infantry and cavalry in the blob. And even though it's very hard to follow exactly what's going on, it's definitely a whole ton of value. Meanwhile, on the left and right flanks, I do hold back some Centaurs, and this is just to make sure that my Dark Shard repeater crossbows, my Dark Riders, are able to continue firing and supporting the middle fight. But that my cavalry, Valiant Sacrifice, do go away, which means that I am down to just my chariots, a couple units of cavalry left, and the dreaded Marathi Manticore blob. Now, as for the Lord of the Beastmen, he is a Brave Shaman on a chariot. He does manage to take out the feral Manticore, but I do still have Marathi and yet another Manticore, so I'm still not too worried. I also have a healthy amount of chariots too, which means that the infantry is not especially scary here. As long as I have a single high HP unit of chariots by the late game, I should be able to clean up house once the mobility of the Beastmen is down. So I do pull my chariots away, these Scourge Runners, to begin kiting out the Beastmen cavalry. They will trade quite effectively while retreating, and while that mobility is gone, I take the time to get some value on my repeater crossbows. Meanwhile, the Beastmen are bringing their units back together now, but I do still have, I think, about one more Soul Stealer in the pocket. Generally, once you reach the late game, you'll usually have one left, and in a very long game, you can typically cast another Soul Stealer, which is usually unexpected, but you should be ready for it. Now, for the Beastmen, most of their cavalry is quite beat up. I do still have Terror on the Manticores, which means that these units of Centaurs are more or less a non-issue at this point in the game. For the Brave Shaman, I can actually snipe him out with my Scourge Runners, and he is taking quite a bit of damage at this point. Meanwhile, the rest of the Beastmen forces, as soon as this guy routs off, they're beat up enough where I think the Terror should be able to shatter them too. So all I have to do is simply play out the rest of the game, chasing off as many units as I can, getting good Winds of Magic regeneration while I do so, and also taking any good engagements that crop up. In this case, I do land my beat up Manticore to try and terror out these dogs. With just a few units of cavalry left, I do just barely manage to do it. The Manticore will be routing off itself though, but still a fairly good trade. I lost 3 extremely beat up units and took out, or at least routed, 2 healthier units. So quite good, and I do still have ammunition too. I've done a fairly good job keeping my repeater crossbows alive, so I'm feeling quite confident in this situation. A Traitor Kin does hit my repeater crossbows, but at this point in the game, that doesn't look like it will be enough, and I'm simply looking to get a pick on that Brave Shaman. Feigned dive on the cavalry here, but I decided to disengage, likely because I don't have that final soul stealer just yet. But I will be able to take out the rest of the infantry using my mobility. The Beastmen mobility is just so battered at this point, they cannot do a whole ton. So I begin grouping up my forces, and this is the sign that I'm fairly confident about another big ol' AOE. Except I don't even need it, as the Beastmen do shatter off. Now that's going to be game number 1, but we'll go into game 2 to really hammer home how strong this Dark Elf style is against the Beastmen. And here we are in game 2 with very similar builds on both sides. Marathi with the, what is it called? The Wand of Caridon to throw down a nice bolt attack. Very strong against chariots, and her usual, max out items kit and just the Soul Stealer. For the Bray Shaman in the distance, he does have a Manticore summon and Flock of Doom. There's no chariots for Razel in this match, since he generally doesn't like to take them, but we'll see that things play out more or less similarly than last time. So we'll just be going over strategy in this case. So what I am trying to do is blobbing up the cavalry for the Beastmen so that I can hit them with the Soul Stealer, bring in a Manticore to support, and then rout them off. The Beastmen cavalry have very low leadership, and I can actually play quite aggressively to force that to happen. So you can see over here, my Dark Riders take an engagement against the Warhounds, and as soon as support comes in to rout off the Dark Riders, I get a huge Soul Stealer and just insane value. Meanwhile, on the left flank, I am outnumbered once again with the Dark Riders, but I bring in the Manticore support and throw down another Soul Stealer, and you will see the huge damage that comes in on these Centaurs. Get them to terror route range, and would you look at that, the edge of the map is right there, and it looks like they will likely be gone, and they are, which is absolutely terrible for the Beastmen. Now, Soul Stealer is on cooldown, the recharge is fairly short, so I'm actually not too worried about having it off cooldown, and I actually use it quite aggressively. Meanwhile, just continuing to take good engagements here. I do get a couple of my Dark Riders caught. A little bit unfortunate, but I can just simply pull away and take about a third of their HP and damage. Meanwhile, a big infantry fight over here. Looking pretty bad for all of my units that are caught up here, but I should have a Soul Stealer coming up very soon, and since the Beastmen are more or less committed to this fight, I'm actually confident enough to dive into this huge blob of units here with just Marathi, the Manticore, and the chariots, and I do manage to hit everything in here. And you can really see by using these Soul Stealers back to back, right as it comes off cooldown, you are going to be in a very good place. You just have to make sure that you're setting up these scenarios before the cooldown is actually off, generally playing quite aggressively. As for my cavalry and chariots, I do have quite the mobility advantage now, and all the shock damage on the infantry does get them to rout off. Like I said earlier, Beastmen with very bad leadership, they're going to be having a pretty rough time if you manage to send in all your units in at the same time. And now with no support, I can pretty easily goon out this Bray Shaman, and if he goes down, it's definitely over for the Beastmen. They rely far too much on their leadership to stay on the battlefield, and there we go, he does shatter. Tons of cavalry comes in to try and support him, but this only gives me a very strong engagement, and there we go, another Soul Stealer does drop. The 3-minute and 30-second mark. Extremely low cooldown, and just diving in onto those threats, forcing a blob on the Beastmen mobility, and it's going to be another victory for the Dark Elves. Now, this is not an impossible matchup for the Beastmen, but I hope today that I've shown it is quite a difficult one indeed. Definitely something I would consider counterpicking if the opportunity presents itself. Most Beastmen players aren't banning Dark Elves right now, so this could be a nice strategy. Just don't get your own units caught up by an overcast Traitor Kin, and you'll be okay. You want to have the smaller force getting surrounded by the larger one before punishing them. But that's going to be it for today, and I'll see if I can get out more videos in the future, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, I am posting every other day now. You'll only expect about 1 day between videos, so should be nice and exciting, and hope this was informative.